You are listening to News and Views, the Quint's podcast series where we introduce you to some of the greatest minds across different fields through in depth interviews. This is Sadhika Tiwari, and I am in conversation with Nuhash Humayun, the writer, director, and producer of Moshari, which is the first Bangladeshi short film to qualify for the Oscars. Hi, Nuhash, thank you for speaking with us. How does it feel that you had it was your brainchild essentially, for this to become the first Bangladeshi film to look at the Oscars now?
I think honestly, it's incredible. When we were making Moshari, we honestly had no idea it would go this far. In fact, so many people told us that horror fantasy film from Bangladesh, don't even bother sending this to film festivals. People were really confused by what it was going to be or what potential it had. So to me, to this day, I'm just thankful that people got to see it. I thought, wow, is this even worth finishing? Do I just get rid of it? So there was a lot of anxiety in the process of making it. So now to see it in Variety's Oscar prediction list, to see it become the first Oscar qualifying film from Bangladesh, it's all honestly so overwhelmingly amazing.
I'm sure. I'm sure. So, what was the genesis of this idea? Essentially, when did, and I'm sure it must have started with something completely different, and then probably over the time and over the with process, it became what it became. So, I just want to know the entire journey. What was the first idea? Where was it born, and then what is the final shape? Sort of, what was it very different from the final shape that it took eventually?
Well, honestly, I'm 30 years old now. The idea came to me when I was a lot younger. I think I was about 13 years old. And I think my ideas were generally crazier, weirder, wilder when I was young. And what I wanted to do was I wanted to tap into my inner child and find, those ideas that I had that I didn't honestly have the capacity to make at that time, obviously. So I think one of the main ideas was the moshari, the mosquito net. It's something, we're so familiar with in South Asia, in parts of East Asia, in Africa, because we have so many mosquitoes in these tropical regions. And I always imagined when sleeping under a mosquito net, I imagined something scary to be on the other side of the bed, like outside of the net. I imagined, what if there was a dark shadow? What if there was a monster there? And I would get really scared. And at the same time, I'd feel safe inside the mortuary, but I'd also feel a little suffocated inside it as well. And I thought that's kind of the perfect metaphor for family, because our families protect us, yet sometimes they suffocate us. Sometimes it's too much. And that was really the emotional genesis of the idea of to sort of craft this very South Asian, very culturally rooted horror movie mythology that doesn't exist before. And another idea for sort of the bigger world was just, we always see in the movies, like I grew up on Hollywood movies, I grew up on sort of Russian sci-fi movies, and I always thought, okay, how come it's always New York that's getting destroyed, or London? And those are always the parts of the world that's focused on the major cities, quote unquote. And I thought, what's happening in Bangladesh when it's the end of the world, when there's something apocalyptic? What if the solution to mankind, what if the survivors were in a small town in Bangladesh? What does that film look like? And that idea felt exciting. It felt empowering. And I thought it was crazy enough to work. And it turns out so many people connected to the genesis of that idea.
Correct, correct. Also, how was your childhood? What was it like growing up? Where did you spend a large part of your childhood, and sort of what is your relationship with the Bangladesh that we see in the film?
Well, I grew up in Bangladesh my entire life. I've always lived here. My father was a writer and a filmmaker. My mother's a poet, and she was a teacher as well. So I have the privilege of growing up around great art and great film. And I think that's the biggest privilege you can have. I watched some excellent films with my father. I sort of was inspired to make films because of my mother. So my family played a big part in my upbringing. But at the same time, in the films that I was seeing, I thought that I would see all these exciting films and think, why don't we have that in Bangladesh? I always felt like a disconnect with the films that I wanted to see from here and the things that were being made. And the more I grew up, I realized that the disconnect was getting bigger and bigger, or maybe I just didn't realize it when I was younger. Like, I grew up loving Spielberg movies, and then I saw this movie called Munich where someone said this line where, oh, there's enough food on the table to feed Bangladesh. And then that felt so weird because that was the first time I heard my country's name in a film, but it was in such a strange kind of negative context that they were like talking about poverty, and we were the first example. And it's not that I had a grudge against the filmmakers or something. I just realized that no one is ever going to do a good job in representing us. No one's going to bother. It has to be us. It has to come from me, or it's going to be no one. So that kind of became like a kind of a mission of mine to just try to do something different, just try to show the Bangladesh that I know, or just try to make something up completely new that doesn't exist before. And I thought that genre cinema is a great way to explore that, because genre is honestly, it's kind of the new universal language. Everyone knows what a horror film is. Everyone knows what a Western is. So the language, the boundaries, all the barriers, all those break down when you kind of tap into genre, I feel.
That's very interesting. So essentially, climate change is something as a concept, especially for the global South. The global South has one of the most vulnerable countries to climate change in the world. Bangladesh happens to be one of those. It's the sort of threat that we are already. Extreme weather events have already begun, and the impacts are not far fetched anymore. We're already seeing it in sort of, it's a piecemeal situation right now, but eventually we know how bad it's going to get. How do you see? I mean, where did that come from in your understanding when you look at your country? How did climate change become a part of the story, or was it always a part of the story and you just decided to shift the lens a little?
Right. I would say that, so I worked for a lot of INGOs here. I've made documentaries about climate change. I've worked with climate change. Another producer on the project was Rashad. He works for UNICEF. He works for the UN. And what we realized was the narrative around climate change around the world, it kind of focuses on the West a little bit, right? It's kind of white, the kind of global narrative on climate change. And we thought it's very different coming from Bangladesh. It's very different from the people who are affected by it, because, you know, in the global South, especially in Bangladesh, we are one of the most affected by climate change, yet we are also one of the least culpable, the least responsible for its effects. And I think there's a palpable irony in that we didn't cause this necessarily, oversimplifying it, but sure, yet we are so affected by it because the people, especially women, children in the coastal regions of Bangladesh, they're not, climate change isn't something that's coming soon. It's something that's already here. It's affecting them. It's affecting their lives. It's basically, some of these people have no access to water. Some of these people are experiencing like floods and cyclones and all these unnatural weather events that didn't exist a couple of years ago. And I thought, we're not really going through climate change, it's climate resilience. And I thought that that was an important narrative to bring to the table. So that was always an underlying theme for Moshari. But at the same time, the other thing we didn't want, because we've made so many documentaries, again, as I've said before, about climate change, and realized sometimes people don't want to see a movie when they know what it's about. Like, you don't want to go and watch, oh, it's the climate change movie. Right? So I think it was really important to have multiple narratives. Yes, there's a climate angle, an environmental angle. There's also a post-colonial angle. It's also just a story about two sisters and a family and their journey. So I think having those layers is really important, because sometimes in trying to have a message in your films, it ends up not being entertaining. At the end of the day, you know, I know that not a lot of people want to hear facts or stories or numbers about climate change, but they want to see a scary movie. They want to see a fun time at the theater. So it was important to weave all those things in, but also keep the emotion and the fun and the genre of it intact, because I think that's where a lot of these movies fail. They just kind of become documentaries in the name of fiction. And we wanted to avoid that trope a little bit.
Correct, correct. Also, within Bangladesh, do you feel there is a lack of sort of political awareness or politicization of climate change? Uh, I mean, it's not a political issue. There is some will to act on it, maybe, but people also need to, it has to become a part of election manifestos. And you think, especially movies like yours, when people watch things like these and see themselves, and then they're like, yeah, exactly, that's us, and that's a problem, and somebody else should fix it, and politically people are responsible for fixing it. So at least within the nation, do you feel it'll help sort of contribute to that political will?
Yes, I think that's really important, not just in Bangladesh, but it needs to be, I think globally, we need to hear more from parts of the world like Bangladesh and the global south who are most affected by it. I think that's really important because I don't think like creating a conversation around climate change in Bangladesh alone can make enough of a difference globally. Again, for me, I'm just an artist, so for me, it comes from a place of I'm afraid of honestly losing my people, losing my culture, losing my home as this gets worse and worse. Not that it's already not really bad. So
Hmm.
I think the arts could be a great way to create those conversations, but it definitely needs to end up being something that is, actionable politically. And I don't know how much of a difference all the climate conferences are making because I've seen like a lot of mixed debates on that too. Like, are those helpful? Is that just noise? Sometimes is it just kind of larger than life? So yeah, there's so many ways to see it, and all I can do from my little position as an artist is to try to create stories around it.
Correct, correct. Also, I mean, like you said, a lot of the content that we see on climate change is very, and especially, see, the thing is that an IPCC report, for instance, can come and tell you that it's really bad, or the next 10 years are going to be absolutely. I mean, this is going to happen in 2050, and then it still won't move us as much as maybe watching a Don't Look Up will, right? So
Right.
that's the sort of impact cinema has. And all of that is mostly Western, like you correctly pointed. So, like we see at COP27, the biggest sort of climate change conferences that just concluded, the conversation is still stuck at we are historical polluters, but we won't do much. The global north is, I mean, we're still, and in fact, a lot of push at the conference was to move the conversation away from historical emitters to largest emitters, and how maybe it's a shared responsibility, or largely for the global north to sort of, in ways and means, to just sort of move away from their responsibility of having done this, and not look at what is happening because of climate change in countries like Bangladesh. So, do you think that, especially now, if Moshari goes to the Oscars, it's something that has not been seen before, or it's something that'll that'll make some bit of a difference? Or was is that your intention? I mean, is that wishful thinking on your behalf? Do you hope it does?
Yes, that is wishful thinking. That is the goal. That is the ambition. When Moshari premiered at South by Southwest, about climate change, because I said that, look, you're seeing this film. It seems like it's about the end of the world. You might think it's about COVID. It's not. When we made it, we were thinking about the perils of climate change in the global south. And I gave a little speech about that at the end of the film. And it got a really great response. The audience really connected to it because I ended it by saying, I know not everyone wants to hear a speech about climate change. That's why we made a scary movie instead. And I would love to, ideally, I would love to be able to say some version of that at the Oscars. I would love to be able to present the film at more places and also to talk about these issues. And I think that, the thing Moshari does, there even in the opening couple of minutes is it it talks about the West. It kind of puts things into perspective for the people here, and I think that's important because when I grew up, I grew up on cartoons like Captain Planet, and there were all these like environmentally sort of charged cartoons that I grew up with. And they all kind of had the same message, which was you can save the planet. It's on you. Just like turn off your light bulb when you're getting out, blah, blah, blah. It was the perspective was, oh, the world is in ruins, but it's your fault. You individually have to make the difference. But then that is kind of a capitalistic thing that's being pushed onto us, that was being pushed onto us for a while. The real narrative is some people are more responsible. Some nations and some corporations actually have a much larger chunk of the responsibility. They're, the largest emitters, as you put it, versus the others. So it's not, oh, it's everyone's problem and everyone's equally responsible. We need to be unapologetically like sort of pointing the finger where it needs to be pointed. And I think films like Moshari aren't afraid to do that. And I think we need more. I love Don't Look Up, but I also think we need more films from other parts of the world, not just from the West, that address that, so that the narrative overall globally changed. Because for the longest time, I believed that, oh, it's my fault that the world is in ruins because I didn't turn off a light bulb when I was a kid. But, I think the newer generation of children even need to have that ingrained, that no, the world and how certain places have more impact, that does change things, if that makes sense.
That's beautiful, Nuhash. In fact, more power to you. And do you feel so, as the writer, director, and producer, this is pretty much entirely created by you? So in the future, what is the work that you're looking at? Is a lot of your work henceforth going to be focused around the place you grew up in, your country, issues like climate change, or largely issues that are, or I mean, this sort of blend between personal and something so large and political and international and so big, and yet so personal, and especially like you said, as a child, you would be inside the mosquito net, and these are your personal fears. So I mean, is it going to be a blend? What is your work going to look like in the future, at least? And are there things that you're currently working on?
Yes, in fact. So there is a potential feature version of Moshari that I'm trying to develop. So really excited about that. And at the same time, I'm working on my first feature. It's called Moving Bangladesh. It is a story about the first startup from Bangladesh called Patao and their journey. And it's sort of about the tech revolution happening in our part of the world, which a lot of people also don't know about. Going forward, I love stories that are personal and political at the same time, in a sense, because I think certain political things are very hard to make personal. And I like that challenge as a storyteller. How can you take these sort of larger than life things and then put a face to it, put an emotion to it, but also, have escapism and love and heart and action and fun and comedy and horror, because you need those things as well. You need escapism in cinema as well. And I think that's an important blend to have, because a lot of the times when I was a kid, I would, I'd watch an adventure movie or an Indiana Jones or a superhero movie, and that would be sort of how I found solace. So yeah, I'd also love to tap into those aspects of the psyche as well. It's going to be a journey, and I'm just excited to find issues and themes and personal sort of identifiers that connect with me, and try to keep my sort of country and my home in the DNA of whatever I make.
Yeah, that's in fact very exciting for us as well. Can you tell us a little more about Moshari, the feature? How's it going to look?
There's not one at the moment. What I do understand is there's a lot of love for the short and a lot of interest in expanding the world. But if it does happen and build on the world, I want to make it smaller and do a deeper dive into the themes, into the relationships, and into the core of that story. So yeah, I'm really excited about potentially exploring that. So wish me luck.
Absolutely. All the luck and all the power to you. And I absolutely love the short film. And I'm sure all of our listeners would too. If you could tell them a little about where is it available, where can they watch it?
Sure. So Moshari is available available on Vimeo and YouTube. So Moshari, that's Moshari. You can just do a Google search and it should come up on your YouTube or Vimeo. I would recommend Vimeo. And also we have a website, mosharimovie.com. So you can go check it out there as well.
Thank you so much, Nuhash, for speaking with us. This was absolutely wonderful. And like I said, all the luck and more power to you.
Thank you so much, Sadhika. This was such an insightful, thoughtful conversation.
And that was this episode of News and Views with Nuhash Humayun. Follow us on Instagram at The Quint and tell us what you want us to talk about next week. And check out our website, thequint.com, for more groundbreaking reports and videos. This was Sadhika Tiwari, and I'll see you in the next one. Also, our new podcast series from our colleagues at the Quint Hindi is up. To check it out, go to Quint Hindi's YouTube channel or wherever you get your podcasts. News and Views is a Quint original podcast executive produced by Shelly Walia and Ritu Kapoor. This episode was hosted by Sadhika Tiwari, produced and edited by Anjali Palod. It uses the theme music from BMG Production Music, and a special thanks to our guest Nuhash Humayun. Until next time, bye-bye.
You were listening to the Quint's podcast.